My parents crowned my sister as royalty while treating me like I barely existed. When I finally walked away, their reaction was beyond belief. Growing up in suburban Ohio, I assumed every family had a golden child and a scapegoat. Turns out, mine perfected the art. My name is Natalie. And for 26 years, I watched my parents idolize my sister Madison while treating me like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. Madison was born 2 years after me, and from the moment she arrived, my parents, Linda and Robert, decided she was their masterpiece. Meanwhile, was the draft they wished they could discard. The favoritism started early. Madison got brand new clothes and toys. I got hand-me-downs from a neighbor's daughter who was smaller than me. Madison wanted piano lessons, and my parents immediately found her the best teacher in town. When I asked for art classes, they said money was tight and handed me free coloring books from the dentist's office. Every birthday, every Christmas, every gathering centered on Madison. She opened expensive presents while mine were useful things like socks or school supplies. My parents proudly showcased her piano performances, but if I tried to share my artwork, the subject changed almost instantly. Achievements meant nothing. If they came from me, Madison got a B+ in math and was rewarded with ice cream. I earned straight A's and got a half-hearted good job. The double standards were constant. Madison stayed out late, skipped chores, and talked back without consequences. I got grounded for forgetting the trash or speaking up when dinner conversations revolved around Madison. By high school, even teachers and relatives noticed. Once my Aunt Carol asked if things were okay at home. I wanted to scream about the unfairness, but I stayed quiet. Who would believe parents could be so openly biased? College gave me some distance, but the favoritism followed me through phone calls. Every conversation was about Madison, her grades, her boyfriends, her social life. My parents asked briefly about me before returning to her. Even when I graduated summa cum laude in graphic design, they spent the reception praising Madison's law school acceptance. The breaking point came at her law school graduation. My parents flew across the country, booked a luxury suite, and hosted a huge party with catering, a photographer, and custom decorations that read, "Congratulations, Madison." 3 months later, I finished my master's in marketing with a 4.0 GPA while working full-time. Their response? A short text, "Congrats, honey," followed immediately by more news about Madison's law internship. The imbalance only grew. When Madison bought her first house, my parents covered her down payment, co-signed the loan, and even furnished it. When I mentioned wanting a place, my father suggested I find a roommate. Madison received a brand new BMW for her new job. I was still driving a 15-year-old Civic with over 200,000 miles that I'd bought myself. Family dinners became unbearable. Every conversation revolved around Madison. Her job, her boyfriend Derek, their vacations, her opinions on everything. I could sit silently for hours while my parents treated her casual remarks as profound wisdom. The final straw was Thanksgiving 2 years ago. Madison showed up 2 hours late without calling, yet my parents acted grateful for her presence. During dinner, she announced Derek had proposed. My parents erupted with joy, planning parties and crying happy tears. I quietly mentioned my promotion leading a major Fortune 500 campaign. The table went silent for a few seconds. Then my mother asked Madison about wedding dress shopping. In that moment, I realized nothing I accomplished would ever matter. I could cure cancer, win a Nobel Prize, or discover life on Mars, and they'd still talk about Madison's manicure. The engagement party that December confirmed everything. My parents hosted it at an upscale country club with over 150 guests, custom cocktails, a DJ, and a speech from my father praising his perfect daughter. I stood in the back wondering if he even remembered my college major. By the holidays, I made my decision. I began pulling away, cutting calls from weekly to monthly, then none at all. I skipped dinners, citing work, and focused on building my own life. I started dating Jake, made new friends, and pursued hobbies I'd neglected. By March, I was effectively no contact. My parents barely noticed, too absorbed in wedding planning. It wasn't until they needed my address for invitations that my mother realized she hadn't heard from me in weeks. Her voicemails weren't worried. They were irritated, like my absence was inconvenient. I ignored them and kept moving forward. But as the wedding planning ramped up, their messages grew more urgent. My mother wanted me to be a bridesmaid, help plan showers, and contribute money. The irony was hard to miss. After years of excluding me, they suddenly expected me to celebrate Madison's happiness and even help pay for it. I stayed silent. Through the shower, the bachelorette party, and all the pre-wedding events, I kept my distance. According to Aunt Carol, my parents were starting to panic, but they still didn't understand why. The wedding invitation arrived in my mailbox last April, written in my mother's careful handwriting. Inside was a formal card for Madison and Derek's June wedding at an exclusive vineyard. Tucked inside was a note asking me to call her immediately about joining the bridal party. I stared at that invitation for hours, recalling every slight, every dismissal, and every moment I was treated as less in my own family. The expectation that I would celebrate Madison's happiness after years of neglect was astonishing. Instead of calling, I wrote a letter. I spent several days crafting it, making sure every word conveyed my feelings without confusion. In it, I laid out the years of favoritism, the lasting impact of being the overlooked daughter, and my decision to move forward without them. I returned the invitation with my letter, officially declining. I explained that I wouldn't attend the wedding or future family events, providing specific examples of their unequal treatment over the years. The letter ended with my decision to go permanently no contact, stating clearly that the damage was irreparable and that I deserved better. I wished Madison happiness, but made it clear I would no longer participate in the pretense of being a close family. The response was immediate. My phone rang constantly for 3 days. My mother left frantic voicemails that shifted from confusion to anger to pleading. She accused me of being selfish, dramatic, and threatened to show up at my apartment if I didn't respond. My father, who rarely called me at all, left several messages saying he was disappointed in my immaturity, accusing me of ruining Madison's wedding, and demanding I reconsider for the sake of family unity. Madison's reaction revealed the truth about our relationship. She called in tears, not because she missed me, but because my absence was causing problems for her wedding. She accused me of jealousy and of trying to steal focus from her big day. Her voicemails proved exactly what I had lived with all my life. Even my boundaries were somehow framed as being about her. When I ignored the calls, my mother enlisted extended relatives. She told each one a different version of events that painted me as unstable and vindictive. To my cousin Jennifer, she claimed I'd had a breakdown. To my uncle Mike, she said I was jealous and trying to ruin Madison's wedding. It was a deliberate smear campaign. But my mother underestimated how much the family had noticed over the years. Jennifer later admitted she'd always wondered why I seemed so quiet at gatherings while Madison drew all the attention. My uncle Mike told me he'd long seen the difference in how my parents spoke about us. The turning point came when my grandmother Rose, my father's mother, got involved. After receiving conflicting stories from relatives, she called me directly. At 87, she was still sharp and had decades of perspective. She had witnessed the favoritism herself at countless events and noticed how I had slowly pulled away. When she asked what really happened, I finally opened up. For 2 hours, I explained the years of favoritism, the emotional neglect, and what had finally pushed me to cut ties. She listened quietly, occasionally making sounds of understanding. When I finished, she told me she believed me. She admitted she had seen the unfairness, but hadn't known how to step in without creating conflict. She even shared that she and my late grandfather had worried about my self-esteem, but chose not to interfere in their son's parenting. Her support was both healing and painful. She apologized for her silence and told me she was proud of me for protecting myself. She promised to put an end to the gossip by telling family members the truth, and she did. Her reputation for honesty meant her words carried weight, and she corrected the false stories my mother had spread. Hearing that others had noticed the favoritism was validating, though heartbreaking. It proved I hadn't imagined it, but it also showed how many people stayed quiet while I was left to cope alone. My Aunt Carol also reached out with genuine concern. She admitted she had seen the favoritism over the years and understood my decision. She reminded me of moments I had forgotten, like Madison's 8th birthday, where I worked behind the scenes while Madison enjoyed the spotlight, or Christmas mornings where the gift imbalance was so stark that adults exchanged uncomfortable looks. These memories confirmed that the unequal treatment had always been obvious. Carol also revealed a conversation she once had with my mother. She gently suggested that I seemed to need more attention and support. My mother brushed it off, saying I was independent and didn't need the same guidance as Madison. That was especially painful because it showed my needs had been recognized but deliberately ignored. My independence was treated as proof I required less, when in reality it was a survival strategy. Carol also updated me on how my parents were reacting. My mother cried daily, insisting I was overreacting to old slights. My father shifted between anger and regret, at times blaming me for being too sensitive, other times questioning whether they had made mistakes. They had even started arguing with each other, my mother accusing him of being absent, and my father claiming she had spoiled Madison and been unfair to me. Their marriage was under strain as they faced the consequences of their parenting. Madison, on the other hand, was characteristically self-focused. Instead of reflecting on her role in the family dynamic, she grew angry that her wedding planning was being disrupted. She told them to ignore my letter and carry on as if nothing had happened. She couldn't grasp that decades of favoritism had lasting consequences. For her, the idea that she might share responsibility for family issues was unthinkable. Meanwhile, the wedding preparations became harder for my parents. Photographers, seating charts, and family formalities forced them to face the reality of my absence. My mother became fixated on finding ways to make me attend, suggesting surprise visits or hiring a counselor. Her desperation showed she still didn't understand how deeply the damage ran. The fallout from their actions had even begun to affect Madison's wedding plans. Would you like me to continue paraphrasing through the full wedding and its aftermath, or stop here at the point where the wedding planning starts breaking down under the weight of the family drama? Several relatives began asking difficult questions about family dynamics once they learned I wouldn't be attending. Some even suggested delaying the wedding until issues were resolved, which sent Madison into a panic over her carefully planned timeline. These reactions confirmed that writing the letter had been the right choice. For the first time, the truth about our family was being openly discussed by relatives who had long witnessed the favoritism but never addressed it. The illusion of family harmony was unraveling as more people recalled their own experiences, making it impossible for my parents to reshape history. Their narrative collapsed under the weight of consistent memories from decades of gatherings. The combined stress of the wedding and family conflict was affecting everyone. My mother lost weight and struggled with sleep, while Carol mentioned my father was drinking more and lashing out at coworkers. Even Madison, though determined to appear confident, showed visible strain. The irony was clear. My absence disrupted them more than my presence ever had. For years I'd been the reliable daughter who caused no problems, quietly carrying the emotional weight that held the family together. With me gone, they were forced to face the reality of their dependence on my stability. Carol said my parents were even reconsidering events from our childhood, questioning whether situations had been handled fairly. While this late recognition was somewhat encouraging, it was far from enough to undo years of damage or convince me to return. The wedding was still months away, but the foundation of their perfect family story had already crumbled. My absence had sparked the honest reckoning they had avoided for decades. 2 weeks before the wedding, my parents arrived at my apartment. The doorman informed me, and I asked him to say I wasn't available. They waited in the lobby for over an hour, hoping I'd change my mind. When that failed, my mother turned to long, guilt-filled texts about me breaking her heart, ruining the family, and being cruel to Madison. None acknowledged the harm I had endured. Instead, they focused only on appearances and how my absence embarrassed them. My father's messages were harsher, demanding I stop this nonsense and warning my behavior was unacceptable, an empty threat, considering I'd been financially independent for years. On the wedding day in June, Jake and I went hiking, phones off. We enjoyed peace in nature, celebrating freedom from toxic dynamics, rather than mourning an invitation I never wanted. Carol later told me the event was everything Madison wanted, except for my absence. Guests asked where I was, forcing my parents to invent excuses. My mother said I was ill. My father claimed work obligations, and Madison told friends I was jealous. Each excuse reflected their unwillingness to accept responsibility. Afterward, my parents reached out again, not out of care for me, but because my absence had raised uncomfortable questions among guests. My mother's tone shifted between anger and desperation, accusing me of humiliating them and demanding I explain myself to others. Her focus remained on their image, not on repairing our broken relationship. That summer, I enjoyed peace. I earned a promotion, planned a trip with Jake, and began therapy to process years of neglect. For the first time, my self-worth wasn't tied to chasing approval from people who never valued me. Their silence lasted into the fall, and I assumed they'd moved on with Madison's new marriage, erasing me from their story. That quiet was exactly what I needed. Then, in October, everything changed. Madison discovered Derek's affair with a coworker only 4 months after their wedding. My parents' perfect narrative collapsed. Suddenly, my phone rang nonstop. My mother left voicemails begging me to come home and accusing me of being heartless for staying away during Madison's crisis. The hypocrisy was glaring. After years of excluding me, they now expected instant support for the sister who had dismissed me as jealous. My father demanded I stop punishing the family and return, unable to grasp that consequences existed for their actions. Madison herself called in tears not to apologize, but to demand my help. She framed herself as a victim of both Derek's betrayal and my absence, refusing to acknowledge the years of mistreatment that had led to my decision. I stayed silent throughout her divorce, which dragged on for months. My parents poured money, time, and constant attention into supporting Madison, in stark contrast to how they treated me. When I faced struggles, whether a breakup in college or job hunting after graduation, I received quick dismissals and minimal advice. But Madison's crisis mobilized them fully. They hired the best attorney, took time off work, and provided endless emotional support. The difference was undeniable. This past winter, Madison moved back home during the divorce, returning to her childhood bedroom, but living with our parents wasn't the comfort she expected. Carol said she was battling depression and anxiety, struggling to adjust to single life. My parents, overwhelmed by her constant needs, experienced for the first time what it meant to parent a child who required more than praise or money. The golden child now demanded more care than they could provide. My mother's messages became more desperate than ever. She begged me to come home, claiming the family was falling apart without me. Only then did she seem to realize that having 2 daughters could have mattered when one needed extensive support. Her pleas revealed what they had always overlooked. I was the steady, independent daughter who needed little from them, while Madison had consumed nearly all their attention. And now, when the balance mattered most, they wanted me back to shoulder the weight they could no longer carry. My mother appeared at my office one afternoon, having tracked me down through LinkedIn and professional contacts. She waited in the lobby until I finished work, surprising me as I walked to my car. After more than a year of no contact, seeing her was unsettling. She looked older, worn down, and far more vulnerable than I'd ever seen. The confident woman who had dismissed my feelings for decades now seemed uncertain and desperate. She pleaded for just a few minutes, saying she'd driven 6 hours from Ohio for the chance to see me. Suddenly, the woman who once ignored my absence was insisting that my presence was essential. Curious about what had driven her to such measures, I agreed to talk at a nearby coffee shop. For the first time in my life, my mother was the one pursuing me instead of minimizing my concerns or focusing on Madison. She admitted my absence had been devastating for the family, but struggled to explain why. She claimed they had all felt lost without me, yet couldn't identify what role I had actually played. Her vague explanations exposed their denial of our family's dysfunction. She insisted I had always been equally loved, even as she begged me to return home specifically to help with Madison's struggles. The contradiction seemed lost on her. When I raised the history of favoritism, she became defensive, insisting I was exaggerating or misremembering. She admitted Madison received a little more attention, but justified it by saying Madison needed more guidance. The conversation confirmed their lack of self-awareness. They truly believed their treatment had been fair, unable to see how damaging it had been for me. Reconciliation was impossible under such denial. I told her that showing up unannounced at my workplace was inappropriate and that nothing would change my decision. I restated my boundary of no contact and asked her to respect it. Instead of apologizing, she grew angry, accusing me of being stubborn and unforgiving. The discussion ended with her storming out, frustrated her ambush hadn't worked. That summer, I learned through Carol that Madison was moving out of our parents' house to rebuild her independence. Living with them as an adult had proved harder than expected, and she wanted her autonomy back. My parents were relieved but also nervous about her ability to manage alone after the divorce. They had grown used to supporting her daily and worried about her mental health without their constant presence. The situation highlighted the difference in how we were raised. I was expected to be independent early on, handling my own problems without support, while Madison, even in adulthood, was treated as fragile and dependent. In the fall, my father made one last attempt at contact. He left a voicemail claiming he finally understood why I had distanced myself. His tone was more reflective than ever before, acknowledging that they gave Madison more attention and resources while expecting me to be self-sufficient. He admitted this imbalance was unfair and expressed regret over losing me. But his apology came with strings attached. He asked me to forgive them, return to the family, and trust they would treat me better going forward. It felt less like genuine remorse and more like a negotiation. I didn't respond, recognizing the timing coincided with Madison regaining her independence. It seemed they suddenly realized they might need me now that their golden child required less from them. Their shift felt motivated by convenience rather than love. By winter, it had been 2 years since I first cut contact, and I'd never been happier. Jake and I were engaged. I earned another promotion, and I had built a circle of friends who truly supported me. The contrast between my life now and my past was undeniable. I no longer wasted energy chasing approval from people who would never give it or comparing myself to a sibling who was always favored. Therapy helped me understand that their treatment reflected their limitations, not my worth. I learned to separate my value from their approval and to accept that healthy families don't operate with scapegoats and golden children. Carol later told me, my parents had started asking relatives about me, trying to gather updates on my life. They hadn't contacted me directly since the workplace ambush, perhaps realizing it would backfire, or perhaps waiting for another crisis. Their refusal to respect my boundaries reinforced my decision. Even after losing me, they couldn't accept that I had the right to control the relationship. Jake and I are now planning our wedding, surrounded by people who genuinely love and support us. My parents won't be invited, not out of spite, but because they gave up that right through years of neglect. Unlike Madison's elaborate wedding planned for appearances, ours will be a joyful, stress-free celebration of love. Sometimes I wonder if my parents understand what they lost. They spent years focused entirely on Madison, never taking the time to know me or value what I offered. Their sudden panic when she struggled revealed they finally realized the benefit of having two daughters, but that recognition came too late and for the wrong reasons. Today, my life is full of people who see my worth and respect me in ways my family never did. Leaving them behind was the hardest decision I ever made, but also the most necessary. For years, I accepted being overlooked, believing I had no choice but to tolerate mistreatment. But I now know I deserve more than being an afterthought in my own family. Walking away freed me from that role. The family who crowned my sister the favorite never imagined the invisible daughter was the one who could have stood by them. Their loss became my freedom, and I have never regretted choosing my own well-being over their comfort.